back today on Hacking the Truth. I'm Jim Clements, Bob Wallace. How are you, Bob?
I'm fine. Can you hear me that far away?
Yeah, I can hear you that far away. Everybody's
Good.
doing remote, so they're used to it. All the
Yeah.
newscasts, just about everything's going on is remote. But the topic we're going to talk about today is UFOs, but we're going to look at it in a little different light. I have some personal experiences I'm not going to talk about today. That'll be a deep dive on the second part of this discussion we're going to have. But purposely, I gave you some information to look at, to read over, to watch, to kind of pull you out of your comfort zone, so to speak, of politics and things we've talked about for many years. And for those of you who don't know, Bob co-hosted my show on television for probably 6 or 7 years or more. And we talked about a lot of different subjects, but we never had the time we wanted. It seemed like the 30 minutes went away way too fast. Well, we have a lot of time now, Bob. I ask you to watch one movie called Walking with the Tall Whites by Charles Hall, who was in the military, who had personal experiences at Nellis Air Force Base. And when you mention Nellis, it's Area 51, it's Groom Lake, it's all that combined with 3 different races of aliens. And first we'll start there. When I asked you to watch that and you did you have this feeling of, wow, they're really here, or I've known this all along? How did it strike you?
Well, I would say overall, there's a lot more evidence than I ever thought. And it wasn't just a 1-second occurrence or a quick photo you snapped of a fuzzy object in the sky. He actually had almost daily contact with them for 4 or 5 years, if I recall. Although
Correct.
after that, I don't believe he ever had any more contact.
You're right, he didn't.
Yeah. And sometimes I felt there was almost a purposeful attempt to humanize the aliens, you know, their love of their children and their care for them and their vulnerabilities. And also, he really sort of made them like people when he talked about them.
Well,
Human.
maybe they are more like people than we really
Well,
imagine.
right. I've been seeing too many Predator movies, I think.
Oh, yeah, probably so. But that's when the amount, you know, what is imagination and what is real? I think that's what we're coming into now, because people have imagined, they have seen things in the sky. Things have been reported in the sky in the 1800s. And he said in his meetings with these people that they told him they've been here at least 8,000 years and sometimes much longer on the planet, which sounds like ancient aliens on television that we see so much.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that when in the old days, they didn't have the concept of aliens. So they made all these folks gods and messengers of God. So
Well,
many
you
of
would
the
think
stories,
that.
I think, were about aliens.
Sure. You would think that if you saw some craft coming from the sky, certainly it would be a chariot of fire, so to speak. But in beginning to talk about this subject, you and I were kicking around the idea, what would society be like tomorrow if today the government finally came out and said, we've had contact for over 60 years. We have technology that far exceeds anything we've told you about. Do you think it would be welcome? People would be mad, or they would be scared? It would be one of the 3 things.
Okay, I don't think they would do it. The history of government is incrementalism. They do a little baby step by baby step. And if you notice, they took a large baby step when the Navy came out and not using the term UFO, but saying unexplored aerial phenomena. They had released 3 pictures or 3 videos. And my understanding is they had actually already been sort of surreptitiously released
Yes,
before.
they had.
Okay, so it wasn't anything really new, but what was noteworthy about it was, at first, this is a government agency, it's the Navy. They're not saying there is no such thing as aliens. They're not saying that well, these can be explained in some other way. They're saying, hey, something happened. We don't know what it is, but it's important enough that we're going to develop guidelines for pilots reporting it. That to me is a huge incremental step into normalizing the idea that there are aliens.
Well, a lot of people say we've been normalized through movies, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was actually based on a governmental movie that was supposed to take place. There was a film of aliens landing, meeting with our generals, and we were going to come forth. They were going to admit it. So there was a script, and I forget the name of the Hollywood producer. I'll have to look that up. We'll put Justin over there on the board to look that up, and we'll put that in. We'll clip that in. But on the day it was supposed to happen, as you may imagine, you can shoot the movie, but you can't have the clip of the ship landing and them talking to the generals. That's out. Well, that was the whole crux of the matter. But the script existed, and someone gave it to Steven Spielberg, and that's the basis of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I think what's happening maybe is we're transferring from fiction to fact. And you'll notice that a lot of other countries, when they want to do a big change in their way of doing things, they have some relatively low-level person say, this is what we're going to do. The head guy doesn't do it. So we're sort of doing something similar here. The Navy's coming out and saying it. There's been some other, was it the radio? There's a radio bureau in the Navy, not in the Navy, excuse me, in the federal government. And they're coming out and saying that there is a great probability of alien life. So what's going to happen, we're going to get a lot of sort of low-key announcements before they spring the bomb. People aren't very good about major changes. They resist them. They automatically say no. So they're going to lead us to this step by step. And I think this is one of the first ones. I can't remember the government ever saying, well, we think there's credibility here. Something's actually here. We don't even know what it is. No attempt to call it a weather balloon or anything like that. And we're going to try to develop better ways of describing this. I think that's huge.
Well, it is huge. And we talked about when something becomes common knowledge. We've talked about that before. But the fact is, it's so much more accelerated than the fighter jet seeing a scout craft that I'll give you, and I've talked to you about this example. I did a radio show for a lot of years from 9 to 1 here in Jacksonville. I got a call one day, and Jim Brower, who was on the board, said, Jim, this fellow from the military wants to be on your show. He's in town for a meeting. He's just wrapped it up. And I can't tell you who he is. He said XYZ. I said, well, why would he want to be on my show? I mean, okay, fine. So he shows up. He's in the black car, the government. He's the fourth rank guy in the Pentagon. He's got a driver. He's got a guy with a weapon that stands outside the studio when he's in for the interview. And I kept thinking, this is the strangest thing. Why would this man even do this? Well, we talked about what he did in the service, and I can't tell you that because you'll know when I finish the story. And so did the interview, and he built up the branch of the military he was in, and pretty much just common talk, but spread out on my desk, imagining I did 4 hours a day on the air. I had this one section there, which is UFOs and fly saucers. This was 1980. And there was one picture there, and it said, his favorite food is ice cream. And it showed a gray alien, the kind with the big eyes. And there was a window, and there are 3 military men standing there looking in the window. Now, this was a drawing. It wasn't a picture. And now we were off the air and done with the interview. And he said, do you really believe in all this? And I said, oh, I do believe in it. I have firsthand experience. He said, that's interesting. He said, you see that picture? And he tapped it. See that guy right there? I said, yeah. He said, that was me. And I looked at him. I said, that was you? He said, yes. His favorite food is ice cream. So we had little discussion there before he left. He said, I'm going to give you a few breadcrumbs, and you can follow these breadcrumbs, but you can never tell anyone you talk to me about this. I will deny it, and it could cause you a lot of problems. I said, okay, that's a deal. But with the breadcrumbs he gave me, and I'm not going to say exactly what they were, but he did lead me to find out where that underground base was, where the Grays, and it's in Dulce, New Mexico. It's an underground base, and they've been there for a number of years. And there's, if I remember correctly, about 700. And I remember when he was walking out, and I said, well, I hope it's a good thing. And he turned around and looked at me and kind of stared and said, I'm not so sure. And that was it. So that, at that moment, 40 years ago, I knew it was much deeper than even I thought. So I started searching and finding other information. And I thought the biggest breakthrough we had was when this book came out, the day after Roswell, Philip J. Corso. He worked on artifacts from the Roswell crash, tells the whole story. And I won't go into detail. The parts that came in, they went to Hewlett Packard, different places to find out what they were, because they didn't know what they were, fiber optics, a number of things. Went to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, Bob, and you never saw an interview with him. CBS, NBC. So that's how deep the cover-up is.
Well, I guess the next answer is, why are they loosening up now?
Because I believe the evidence is so strong. They're loosening up now because of another book right here, where you have generals coming out, where you have people, ex-military people, believing that it's wrong that they signed these agreements. They would not talk about what happened. When they see what's happening in the world, that we could purify the water, that we could have energy. One of them said, these crafts, some of them are powered by a power cell that's no bigger than a matchbox. So you can imagine how much power that is. All of these things the government has used to develop other craft for deep space travel. Basically, he told me that NASA was a dog and pony show. They're so far, they're 400 or 500 years behind of what we're really doing in deep space projects and dark space projects.
You know, I read somewhere that the next habitable planet by us is 31 light years away.
Mm-hmm.
And if I recall, a light year is 1 trillion miles. That's pretty far. No, excuse me, it's 6 trillion miles.
6 trillion, yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty far. So they would have to, someone would have to have the ability to not just travel fast, to travel even the speed of light. It would take you forever to get there.
No, it's faster than the speed of light. And Charles Hull described of the 3 aliens, the tall whites were the only ones who could only go the speed of light. The other 2 went faster than the speed of light. But when you get to that point, then time, energy, space, and matter is really an illusion. It's beyond what Einstein thought.
Yeah. And, you know, I've done a little checking, reviewing what I used to know about these things, that just to put it in perspective, if you can only go the speed of light, if you had a spacecraft, you could go around the equator 7 times in 1 second, all the way around the world.
That's spinning like a top.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you start working with these numbers, it's incredible. And that was one of the things that that I found was, do you remember Carl Sagan?
Of course.
Yes,
Cosmos.
he was a great guy for poking holes in other people's theories and saying that they believed in idiotic things, but he believed in the probability of aliens. And what's interesting to me is he died in 1996, and he had made that prediction well before that. And the truth is, let's assume that we don't know anything about aliens for a moment, and we just decide, what is the chance there's aliens? Right now, the world and the universe, I should really say, is so much bigger than Carl Sagan ever knew. We've discovered that the natural laws of science apply throughout the known universe, and that there's RNA, which is the building block of life, is everywhere. So we've had these three big new pieces of information that, on top of what he already thought, I mean, it's almost like a sure thing in Las Vegas that there's aliens out there.
Well, the other thing, when you look into the night sky and you see the stars and the planets, you think everything in between is just nothingness. We're finding out it's full of information. There's a current running through everything. It's just not nothingness.
Well, the other part of it is everybody talks about the Big Bang Theory. Now, if you think about the Big Bang Theory, that happened, I think, 14 billion years ago.
I remember it, yeah.
Yeah, and we've been expanding at the speed of light for 14 billion years. That's a pretty big place. Right?
It is. It's huge.
And now scientists see, universe actually really means everything in creation, but we don't really use the word that way. We use it to mean everything we know that's out there. So they're beginning to think that maybe there are multiple Big Bangs out there, not just one. So it's gotten so that the universe is so huge, so full of everything, that there's no way that we're the only intelligent life anywhere. It's just,
oh no, it's
my imagination.
Oh, there are probably thousands or tens of thousands of civilizations. There's no doubt about that. But on this planet, they have been visiting, if it's correct in what they say, 8,000 to 10,000 years at least. And I know they've had personal relationships definitely in the late 40s and all through the 50s with a number of people. And there was a movie I asked you to watch, The Friendship Project, about a group of Italians that actually made contact with people, actually helped them. They told them to go to a spot with their cameras and they would fly by so they could get pictures. I mean, it sounds incredible. And they kept all of this under wraps for all these years.
And what's interesting to me, it was a give and take relationship. They needed help from humans, and humans got help from them.
Yes.
That's one of the things that we haven't talked about that I'd like your opinion on. Are aliens actually smarter than us?
That's a good question, because you gotta have to define what smart is.
Well, just the fact that they're technologically more advanced than us, they could be 1,000,000 years ahead of us in civilization and actually be slower than us in the rate of invention.
That's true. And what we come to know is common sense. What really just applies in a certain situation, they may be so intellectual that they can't put that together.
Because one of the things that I wonder about is, why do aliens bother to come here? I mean, I can't really see any great benefit from everything that you asked me to take a look at that they got out of staying in what for some of them is a fairly hostile environment. I remember reading about Charles Hall, and he said that people were, that he saw were afraid of a bumblebee might bite them.
Yeah,
that could have dramatic effects on them. So yeah, this is a dangerous place for them. So why are they here?
It's a way station when they travel the universe. And he defined that as they need to work on their crafts. They have problems with their craft. They need certain elements that the Earth has. That's why they visited and stayed here. And no, they've been in colonies on Earth under Antarctica. In fact, I don't know if I brought the book here, but yeah, I did. U.S. Navy Secret Space Program. These are people in the military coming out telling you they've worked on these programs. This is not just some dream of someone. Their base is under Antarctica. In fact, I think there was a Nazi base at one time, and to what you're talking about, how smart they are, I think they finally figured out Hitler wasn't the good guy they were thinking, and they split from Hitler. All the technology the Germans had just wasn't happenstance that they had the U-2 rocket and they were developing the jet engine way before we ever thought about it.
Right. Do you, in the stuff you have read, do we have resources that they don't have, that they come here to get, or is what we have commonplace throughout the universe?
That's a good question. I don't know that. But I know our environment, and we have what we call the Nordics, which favor cooler weather, and they're in Antarctica. The desert is very favorable to some of them, depending on their home planet. And the military in trade outs or what they need, whether it's a way station to live here, what they get technology. But what I found interesting, they will not give them the technology, will not give us the technology for deep space travel. They don't trust us. And can you blame them? We have about 300 ongoing wars on any day around the planet. We're a
And if I, re-
virus. We're
yeah,
talking
if I,
about
re-
coronavirus. We're the coronavirus of the galaxy, buddy. We are.
well, from what I remember, they've actually have 17,000 recorded wars throughout history. And we're engaged continuously in the United States with some military action somewhere in the world for the last, I don't know how many decades.
Oh, yeah, not surprising. And many we don't even, tribal wars, we don't even know about. They go on every day.
See, one of the things that I wondered about is, why do people resist the idea that there's aliens out there? Are they afraid of aliens? If you remember, the history of Europe, which is basically the history that most of us have, is one of colonization, exploitation, stripping other societies of everything of value that they have. And as humans, we project our past onto aliens. So maybe a lot of people think that aliens are predatory just like we're predatory. And if we have technological superiority, we'll exploit that. So they'll exploit it.
Well, we talked about, or we kicked around the idea, okay, tomorrow, hey, there's a press conference. It's on every TV in the world. They're here. We've been working with them. Think of the foundational institutions that are based on feelings, imagination, non-reality, and I'm talking religion. And I'm not against any religion, but the fact is, if you're saying this happened in whatever time frame, and this is the great guru of this, oh, by the way, these people have been alive for 80,000 years before we were ever on Earth. What does that do? The foundation, I would think, would just be destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. I remember the story about explorers coming to America and finding Indians. And according to the knowledge that existed in Europe at that time, there was no other races. So that they knew that if they went back and said, oh, we found another race, they probably burn at the stake. So they actually brought Indians back to prove their point. And you know, you're right. Every religion has a cosmology. This is how everything got to be the way it is. And aliens would sort of be opening up a door in the middle of it and saying, hey guys, we're here. And it's not going to fit their story.
Knock, knock,
So
knock.
that's going to be a big problem.
Well, I definitely think so. In 2008, the Catholic Church released a directive of saying it's okay to believe in extraterrestrials. And I believe the reason the Catholic Church did that, they know they're extraterrestrial. They have information, they have insight, and they're trying to basically get ahead of the curve because this is going to happen. How are we going to construct something that fits us back into this picture when it happens? That's a stretch. I don't know how that's going to happen. But there are people who will accept anything on blind faith. There are people who think the earth is 4,000 or 5,000 years old and it's still flat. I don't know what to tell you.
You know, actually, in my readings about aliens, I came across the flat earth idea. And apparently, that's been exaggerated. The intelligentsia, whatever you want to call them, the Middle Ages, knew that the earth wasn't flat, but the commoners thought the world was flat. And somehow we took that idea and said everybody was that way. So they really did know that. And, one of the things that was remarkable to me was Copernicus deciding that without any instruments at all, that's the part that's cool. He had no instruments. He just had his senses. He determined that the earth revolved around the sun. Now, you have to remember, as we forget sometimes these things, our original view was that the earth was the center of creation, and all creation revolved around the earth, and that we were the pinnacle of God's creation. Well, the aliens may upset all that idea, and Copernicus, was backed up by Galileo because he actually had telescopes, and so he could add more proof to that idea. But there was great resistance, and there was danger to your life to hold such notions back in those days.
Both of them were placed under house arrest, and I think Copernicus finally signed off saying it wasn't true what he said because it was going against the Pope, basically.
Yeah, and I can see aliens being demonized, that they're minions of the devil and all this kind of thing. I don't know how bad it would be. It depends how frightened people get. People attack what scares them. And I think that's one of the things that people who know for sure about all this are concerned about is public reaction. No, you and I have talked about government again and again, but one of the things I've been toying with is the government actually is afraid of us. I realize there are too many of us. If we all got together, they would be in deep trouble because they live amongst us. They're not like in some of the movies where they live in some space station or planetoid up above the earth telling us what to do where they're safe from us. Right? So they are actually afraid of us. And they're very careful
you wouldn't know
what they do.
And the reason, and that's one of the reasons, and we're going to do a show one day on Saul Alinsky's book, The Rules for Radicals, and you'll see what has happened in this country. It's outlined in the book. But when you fragment people, black and white, rich and poor, and you keep them divided, that's what the government wants to do because they lose their power.
Right. They would no longer be top dog.
No.
And we may not be top dog as people if aliens do turn out to be smarter, more capable than us. So that's why I wonder about some of the descriptions that I've seen of aliens being weak and all that. Maybe they're trying to allay our fears that aliens are dangerous, that they're really predators in disguise and will be hunting us for sport.
Well, you know what false flag means. A lot of people felt 9/11 was a false flag just to take more of our rights away, which they did with the Patriot Act. We could do many hours on the Patriot Act. It's not for patriots, believe me. But what about this scenario? There are people in the government, people in the military, and these deep space programs. And look, if we're missing $21 trillion from the budget, it went somewhere, okay? Over the past 30 years, there's $21 trillion. They said, we can't find the receipts. It's laughable. I do know where it's going. It's going to black ops, deep space programs. What if the people in government, the generals, and whoever's controlling, I don't think there's one person anymore, there are groups of people saying, we're not going to tell them because then we lose our power. We're giving the power, the aliens have the technology, they're going to be the top dog, then our people are going to revolt and they're going to be mad at us. So we're going to do a false flag because we already have the triangle crafts that so many people see, they're ours. We've back engineered those. So we're going to do a false flag and scare the hell out of people, and they're going to need us even more. So we're going to keep this from them and say, we've got to do this. You've got to do this because the aliens are here and they're coming.
Well, if they can do it over a virus, they can certainly do it with aliens. You're right. Maybe they're setting us up for the big sting.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
But with all these people coming out in the different books, and here's another one, the Majestic documents, and this was one of the early ones, the Majestic 12. And when we're talking about people in government wanting to, there were 12 people on the Majestic panel. And one of them was James Forrestal, and you may know the name, Forrestal aircraft carrier.
Sure.
He was the one of the 12 who at that time, and you can imagine in the 50s, wanted to tell the whole story. They're here, we're working with them, they did, Roswell's real, we're doing the whole thing. Mysteriously, he went crazy and jumped out of a 12-story window at a hotel or something. But he didn't jump out. They gave him wings when he said he was going to come forth and break it to the people. He was too dangerous.
Yeah, I guess one of those things I always check for is how many feet away did you land? If it's like 15
Yeah.
or 20 feet, someone gave you an assist on your way out the window.
And there's also a number of people who believe Kennedy was killed for that reason. He wanted to know. He started as a senator. In fact, on Project Blue Book, the television show, which is really good, he came in and it was an excerpt of the Project Blue Book papers where Kennedy wanted to know about a certain thing that had happened at sea when a spacecraft came up out of the ocean, and it was witnessed by so many people. He wanted all the ins and outs of it. So he was really deep diving into this, and he wanted to know all about it. And I think he scared a lot of people.
Now, we've heard a lot in recent years of the term the deep state, and people defined it in different ways. Does this have anything from what you've read have to do with aliens? Are they in cahoots with each other, or is it mainly just the government itself and only parts of it?
I don't know. I don't know how much it's intertwined because there's so much now. I used to think there were just one. Say we've got the false government, which, if you think your vote really counts, okay, go vote. But the people who really control the power, basically the bankers and the people who create the money, which is the treasury, they really control what we have. I used to think there was another level, or maybe even two more levels. I think it's an onion. I think you can just keep peeling it because there's so much money that's come into these projects. I know the Army, the Air Force, the Navy all have 3 separate projects going on, and they don't like each other, and they're trying to develop their stuff. They don't share information. So if those 3 don't get along, does anybody get along?
Yeah. Well, you and I have talked sometimes about the concept of useful fools. And I find it hard to imagine that aliens would make good, useful fools. And I'm hoping that they could see through any attempt to manipulate them or to use them for one group's advantage against another, to win a war or that type of thing.
Yeah.
I'm hoping the aliens are at least that smart and they're not just, been around longer than we have. Sometimes when I consider that almost all our advances have happened in the last 500 years, which is just a snap of the fingers for geological time, and we've done just astonishing things. And if we don't blow ourselves up or ruin the world or become an extinct species through our acts, which I would like to remind everybody that almost every species that's ever been on the earth since the beginning is extinct. It's something like 80 or 90% of
Sure.
all species are extinct. And there's no reason to just assume that that couldn't happen to us by either ecological damage, nuclear war, and various things like that. We're actually pretty fragile. And that's been shown by this the virus problem that we're having right now, about how dependent we are, that the first thing that we think of is running to the stores to buy toilet paper. I mean, what level of preparedness does that show you? So, I've been trying to think, if I could ask an alien for something, what would I ask for? And the obvious thing we always hear about is technology, right? Faster planes, better weapons, I don't know, secrets about the physical universe.
Clean water or whatever.
Yeah, clean water, whatever it is. Maybe you can have a farm that will produce 20 times what we know how to produce from a farm. Because one of the things that you and I've talked about is we actually are very vulnerable to modern farming. If for any reason we couldn't do, petro-based farming, they say 1/3 of the people in the world would have to die because we couldn't produce enough farm if we could no longer use petrochemicals and all those products to produce. So I think maybe a plan B would be a good idea for that. And maybe that's something aliens can help us with. But the thing I would really ask aliens for is to help us increase our awareness. In the modern era, we have learned how to use brain waves and associate them with awareness states. There are chemicals, I think they call it nootropics,
Yes.
nootropics, okay, that can augment our memories, make us so we can learn better. Now, these are relatively new sciences, binaural beats. Again, I'm not sure I'm saying these things correctly, but
It sounds very hippie to me. I like it.
so in other words, we're sort of at the beginning of this, and they may be at the end of some of this. And if they could boost our awareness, perhaps we could deal with a little more technology and not misuse it. The history of the world is that every new technology seems to be misused before it's properly used.
Well, I believe this is a reason they would not give us the propulsion secrets to travel the universe, because we're not only not intellectually, but spiritually responsible for what harm we could do. Like the prime directive from Star Trek, you don't interfere. You
Right.
you have a high moral code. It begs the question, going back the last 50, 60 years, are we better off spiritually? Or are we worse? Are we as moral? Or are we less moral? Or have just the media and the television shows and the movies, which are so violent and sexual and all the things that we never had as children, because they just didn't produce them in any norm, which it's just out there everywhere. A child now goes into an adult world when they're 12 years old, and they can't handle that.
Yeah.
So if they look at us, have we gotten better, Bob?
I think I don't know if that's exactly the right question. To me, what's happened is all the external authorities that impose morality, impose shame on people, those have largely lost their power. And so now it's up to us as individuals to make the decision to be moral instead of it being imposed on us by churches or the state or our communities. Certainly, I remember things that nobody ever talked about when I was a child, because these are just things that we don't talk about that. There's a lot of elephants in the room back when we were young. But now, I saw a movie the other day where a guy spent the night with a young boy's mother, and here he is about 6 years, maybe like 8 or 9 years old. And he said, "Well, did you all have sex last night?" And the mother, of course, is alarmed by that. And he says, "Mom, I go on the internet. I know about these things." Maybe he shouldn't know about things like that.
No, I don't think he should know about those things, because even though you can say the words, you don't know the meaning of the words. I love when I see parents trying to reason with a 2-year-old. You're trying to reason with it. Well, they said yes. Well, they understand at the level of a 2-year-old, not at the level of a 30-year-old. And it's
So
just,
when aliens look at us, do they see 2-year-olds?
no, 3. But getting back to that question, if you had one thing you could ask them, would to be increase our awareness.
Right. Because, we've talked about before, we have this weird physiology that we actually have 3 functioning brains in our
Yeah.
heads,
Yeah.
right? And one of them is basically related to instincts. Another one's basically related to feelings. And the other one is our cognitive functions. And there's always been a debate about who's driving the bus. And it seems like mostly the first 2 overpower the third one in most people. Another little thing I came up with is related to this. We've heard all our lives that we only use 10% of our brains, right? Now, I checked into this just for fun. I tried to fact check some of the things that we could talk about, and apparently that's not true at all. All
You
right,
use
according to
11%, I can tell.
yeah, they used to say we use 10, Einstein uses 15, right?
Yeah,
But
right.
no, we do use our whole brain. Okay? We just act like we only use 10%. And and if aliens can spur us along and give us a big boost, maybe we can then take care of ourselves. But then we go back to what you talked about, and that's the Star Trek Prime Directive, which is to not interfere, not play God, let each society develop on its own. Don't try to make it the carbon copy of your own society. Let it find its own way. And maybe for better or for worse, we'll end up coming out with something that's relatively uncommon in the universe. I hope so. We've certainly gone through enough growing pains. In the 20th century, we killed 100 million people.
I believe that we have all the tools here we need without anyone's help if we want to increase our awareness. I look at our awareness, if we increase our consciousness and not be so body oriented about our feelings, our body, the looks of our body, and we redirected that energy into learning about who we really are, then we would have that inner morality. You wouldn't need any kind of commandments to tell you what to do. You know what's right instinctively. I just really feel that, but we're individuals and we're not created equal. We got to get rid of this idea that we're created equal. We are not equal. We're equal as souls, but as far as reincarnation and birth and experience, we're not equal at all.
Right. I mean, we should be equal in the eyes of the law. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And right, but it's just as individuals, right? We couldn't be more different. We're born with completely different capabilities, backgrounds, experiences, and all the rest.
But we
So,
place so much value on our positions and our possessions of saying, well, you must be so smart or you're privileged or you're this because you have that job or that much money. But let me tell you, when you're in trouble and you want a plumber, you don't care. That I've always said, if someone landed and said, if you want to point to a group of individuals who are the most responsible, who have common sense, and what group of people would you say if they're asking me? I would say you go meet some farmers. They grow crops. They have to get up when the livestock gets up, when the chickens get up, when the cows get up. They don't take vacations. When something breaks, they fix it. Those are some of the, people call that dumb farmer. Well, let me tell you, he'll have food when you don't. He
who was it
knows
that
what
said
the
dumb
earth
farmer?
is. Pardon?
Jim, who said dumb farmer
People
recently?
will say that.
No, someone said it recently, a politician.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to give him a slide.
Yeah. One of my
Okay.
partners, Mike Askew, grew up on a dairy farm in England. He said, Jim, there are no days off. It's every day. It's 14 hours a day. The cows got to be milked. They got to be fed. They got to be clean. And then when this is personal responsibility at its main level. But anyway, that's what I would ask. Well, Bob, when we continue this, we're going to do some interviews with some of the people in these books that we're going to put online. We're going to put a link to those books. And then we're going to really deep dive into it with these people and hear their stories. I mean, the foreword to this book, UFOs, was from John Podesta, who was in the Clinton administration and also with Obama. I think he was chief of staff in the Clinton administration. He does the foreword to this book. He wants things to be released. He knows it's there.
One of the interesting things I ran across was Harry Reid. He was the Senate Majority Leader during the time of Obama. Not one of my all-time admirable people. And he even said that we would be short-sighted to think that we're the only intelligent species in the universe.
Yeah.
That floored me that he came out and said that. A political animal who's aware of the ramifications of everything he says actually came out and said that.
Yeah. And Leslie Keene, who's the investigative journalist, I said, I thought at one time I wanted to do a book and just talk to generals and everybody and get the story out. Well, she's done it. This is a great book, and we're going to put a link to it. If someone said, Jim, what should I read or watch? I would say definitely Walking with the Tall Whites. And Charles Hall has a number of books with about a 5 series, the Millennium books. And we'll put links to all this on our broadcast at the bottom of the page. And also, I'd like to remind the people, please subscribe and click the like button. And Bob, we'll deep dive into this at a later date.
Sounds like fun.
Okay. Talk to you later, and we'll see you next time on Hacking the Truth.